Welcome to NDTR Spotlight, the corner of the internet where NDTRs shine. I'm your host, Marie Lorraine. And that job search. One of the most frustrating things about being an NDTR is people not knowing what we are or what we do. And how do you show up on a resume or a cover letter and point out what the NDTR credential is and the job search? How do you navigate that? So today I have an expert on cover letters and resume coming in and is willing to talk to us, giving us some really helpful free tips on doing the cover letter, doing the resume, talking about the NDTR credential in a way that's going to make employers pique their interest and want to get you in for an interview. So Anna is here with us today. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Marie. I'm excited to be here talking with you today.
Yes, and all of your expertise. I appreciate the time to give out some free tips for the NDTR audience. But before we start listening to your level of expertise, what makes you an expert in the realm of cover letters and resumes for NDTRs?
I have been actually going through some professional development work since I was in high school. I took a professional development course when I was a senior in high school, where back in the really early days of social media, we were required to make a LinkedIn for class. We were required to make resumes and iterations of our resumes with peer feedback and teacher feedback. Same thing with cover letters, everything down from the job application process. We did informational interviews, we did practice interviews, all the way down to a letter of resignation that, if we needed to leave a job someday, we at least would have a template to follow. So ever since then, and I should mention, growing up, I kind of wanted to be an English teacher. So I've always had a strong interest in writing and grammar and formatting and how that all plays into professional development. So that started, 7-8 years ago when I was in high school. And then my undergraduate dietetics program at University of Wisconsin-Madison had a course for nutrition for NutriSci students that was all about professional development as well. So it was career paths you could take as a dietitian or a DTR, how to build a resume that was specific to the nutrition field, same thing with a cover letter, and covered everything from the content you want to provide to how to use the right verbiage to how to format it so it looks really nice to people who will be interviewing you. So I've kind of pulled from all walks of life, and I think have built a nice portfolio of all different resume, cover letter expertise.
That is so cool. I love when you find a dietitian or an NDTR who has another passion and then they take that passion and they combine the two, because then it's like just such a beautiful combination. So your passion for English and grammar and those things, I see you coming in and like, how can I benefit the nutrition world? And it's cover letters and resumes is where you found your niche. And so I'm so excited that you were able to find that combination.
I was just going to say another thing that I think is really important in bringing this to the nutrition field is most dietitians and DTRs are really science heavy, right? I mean, we go to school and we take organic chemistry and we take biochemistry and food science, but no one is there reminding us what the correct form of your and your is, or when to use a semicolon. And these are all things that my family would always tease me growing up because I would correct them on things like, oh, stop. You're being such a grammar freak. It's annoying. But now I've actually found it really beneficial because that's what sets you apart from other nutrition professionals. If you're going for the same job, is your resume, your cover letter is going to look so much more polished if you are paying attention to those small details.
Yeah, so well said. And when I saw what you were doing, I immediately thought of Grammarly, which is just this generic thing, but there's so much with your expertise as a dietitian that you can bring so much more. So what more could you bring, or what's the angle with the nutrition that you bring that makes you stand apart from something like Grammarly?
Yeah, I mean, Grammarly is a great tool. It's kind of, AI for grammar, but as we know, AI will never be able to take the place of humans in their sense of quirkiness, or not that you want to be quirky on your resume per se. But just that's where my first nuance. I mean, they're just going to find, oh, you missed a comma, or maybe you should use this word instead. But they're not going to find that personable touch that you can put into your resume or your cover letter. So from a nutrition perspective, what I can help with is bringing forward your expertise in a way that highlights, your nutrition credentialing. So I can speak to my clinical experience included blah, blah, blah. And while Grammarly might say, or I mean, just someone else not in the nutrition field might say, oh, you should use a verb like you implemented this program. And of course, you want to use strong verbs. But instead, as a dietitian, or a DTR, one of our most transferable skills is our ability to communicate science to the layperson. So say you are applying for a job that's not necessarily clinical in nature. For example, my job right now is not clinical in nature, it's more food science focused. So when I applied for that job, I did not want to focus on how many patients I met with per day at the hospital, but rather you want to use strong verbs that are relevant to the job or the position that you are applying for. And that is what I think someone in the nutrition field can help draw out of you. So that might include talking about the impact you had on said clients or patients. It's looking at the impact of your skill set rather than just a job description or duties that you did day to day. I can go a little bit deeper into your expertise and say, okay, so when you were working food service, you brought up revenue by 8% in a year. Okay, so to a finance person, that makes sense. But the impact to someone looking at it from a nutrition perspective is helped feed this many more people or increased revenue, which in turn positively impacted the ingredients we were able to source, and thus we were able to create more nutritious or more palatable dishes for our clientele. So it's kind of a holistic approach to the resume.
That's like magic, what you just said. I was listening and I was like, so awesome, because in dietetics, the fields are so different. So you'll be stuck in clinical and you'll learn all the clinical jargon. But if you want to venture off to something else, like how do you talk about that in a way that will get their attention? So definitely a skill set that you have. So cool hearing it. But I wanted to ask from you, what is the benefit of doing a cover letter? Because not every job requires one. Do you recommend that they do? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So what I was always taught and what I agree with is the cover letter, while it may not be required, is really a great complement to the resume. So again, on your resume, you're going to have your contact information, you'll have your educational experience, you'll have your sections of experience. So it might be work experience, volunteer experience, and then you might have additional credentials or publications. Maybe you had part in a research publication or a patent. Those are all great things to have on your resume, but the cover letter is where you really share why you want that job. What kind of things can they pull out of you? You're not just relisting your resume, but you're pulling skills from your resume and talking about how they're relevant to that job, what value you can bring. A resume is just bullet points on a piece of paper that says, for example, like we were just saying, say you worked in community nutrition and you say, I was working at a food shelf and helped X number of clients per week make their way around the food shelf and developed educational materials for heart healthy diet. It's like, okay, well, we also had 4 other applicants who worked at a food shelf and they did the same thing. So what sets you apart? And then in your cover letters where you say, you might tell a personal story. I mean, not like deeply personal, but something that's, for example, when I worked at the food pantry, I had a regular client, and obviously you can't disclose who or any, information that will give away who that person is, but you could kind of tell a story there that's why they had an impact on you and how that inspired you in some way to apply for this job. This made me realize I wanted to get more involved in nutrition policy so that I could work further down the strategic chain and the systemic issues to help alleviate food insecurity. And that is why I am applying for this policy position, for example. So you're not going to tell those personal stories in your resume. Those are going to be concise bullet points that are just highlights. kind of like your Instagram feed. And then your cover letter is going to be like a long Facebook post, we'll say, for
That's
lack
such a
of a
good
better
analogy.
analogy.
That's a perfect analogy. I was like, oh, that makes complete sense when you linked it to social media.
So yeah, you're like, oh, social media, I get that. Just the cover letter is where you say why you want the position, what unique value you bring. So maybe, for example, if you are a more diverse client, whether it's by gender or race or geographical location, that's where you can expand upon your perhaps diversity as a job applicant if you feel like that is an important asset that you would bring to the company. Whereas you're not going to put that in your resume. By the way, I'm a diverse applicant and that's why you should take me. You might not say straight up, oh, I'm a woman and that's why I'm a diverse client in your cover letter, but you might say, my experience as a woman in this field, or my experience as a non-gender conforming person in this field has influenced me in this way, it has given me this perspective, and that is something valuable that I will bring to the company.
That sounds like it's a lot of hard work up front, but it might make the interview process just easier because you've thought through everything. Have you found that's the case with working through a cover letter in the way you just explained?
Absolutely. Because well, that is all depending if they actually, hopefully they do read your cover letter. Of course, if they skim it, you might kind of end up redoing it during the interview. But it definitely is a helpful tool, like you said, if you think through it ahead of time, then when it comes to the interview and they say, okay, well, on your resume, you said that when you worked at the hospital, you saw, we'll say 12 patients per day. And what did that look like for you from a time management, or how did that impact your time management skills? And maybe you talked about that in your cover letter. Maybe in your cover letter, you discussed how you've really grown in your time management skills, which is now you are applying to become a project manager for that reason. So you can pull off your resume. Well, you'll notice in my resume that I saw X amount of patients per day. And what that taught me about time management is blank, how to prioritize my patient load and how to pre-chart, blah, 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 whatever it is. And then you can kind of hit on those same notes that are in your cover letter because you've already, like you said, thought them through, and you can probably recite them in a way that's more concise.
Yeah. So with the cover letter, how long would you recommend? Is it pin on the job, or is there a limit like a resume has limits usually?
Yeah, with a cover letter, I'd say 1 page is sufficient.
Double spaced or
And
single
you
spaced?
double. It shouldn't be too long. I mean, depends on, your font size and your margins, but I would say if you have like 2 solid paragraphs, maybe a little intro, or at least maybe just 1 solid paragraph with an intro and a conclusion, to whom it may concern, or if you know who the person is who will be reading the application. Dear Miss Blank, thank you for the opportunity to apply for this position. And then you get into kind of your objective, which is, when I saw this application, or when I saw this opening, I was compelled to apply because blank. You'll notice in my resume that I have experience with blank. When I was working in said position, I developed skills in blank.
Mm-hmm.
For example, and then maybe you tell a little personal story, and then it would be appreciated, or I would appreciate the privilege to speak with you in an interview. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, your name. It can be that easy. You want it to be formal, but you don't want it to be stuffy.
Yeah.
So the to whom it may concern is kind of a last resort. I mean, because that sounds, again, really formal and stuffy. If ideal case scenario would be, who will be reading it. Or if you wanted, if depending on the company, if it's maybe a more casual vibe at that company, you might say, I'll just give my company for an example. Our name is Purus, and I was applying for a position in the research and development department. So I might say, Dear Purus Research and Development Team. Formal enough, but you're not saying to whom it may concern, because you have to remember there's a person on the other side of that. And that might feel really awkward for them to read. So if you can find their name, that's great. And if you can't, at least find their department.
That's a really good tip because to whom it may concern makes it feel like a template as opposed to like you sat down and wrote
That
it
is a
down.
great point. And it shows you did your research. That's another great thing about the cover letter is in your resume, yes, you can tailor it to the position where you might highlight certain experiences that you've had or might take out certain experiences that are less relevant. With the cover letter, you can really dig into one thing that I value about your company's mission is blank, and I share that same belief. So you really want to make sure it shows you've done your research.
Yeah, that's a great way just to like shine, like show up and like already make them realize like you're putting an effort. You wrote a cover letter. Some people are not even doing that. So that's a
Yeah.
really good way to stand out. So you mentioned some things about the resume and specifically for the NDTR audience, that credential is not very well known. I mentioned it in the beginning of this episode. So how do you talk about the NDTR credential? Is it in the resume? Is it in the cover letter? Where does that show up and how do you talk about it?
For the NDTR credential, I would definitely recommend highlighting it up in your education portion of your resume. Because that is, for example, what I did with my RD credential was I included my dietetic internship. And so for the DTR credential, and correct me here, Marie, I know there is an exam, but there's also coursework. And are there supervised hours that go into it, or is it coursework hours?
In the associate's degree, they do have practicum hours, the internship. So yeah, and then if there's a bachelor's degree, it's just the bachelor's degree. They don't have to have the hours.
Okay, so definitely, if it's the associate's degree, I would list X amount of practicum hours. And if it's the bachelor's degree, of course, you're going to list where your bachelor's degree is from, and you would list any relevant job experience down below. But in your education portion, I would also list your NDTR as a credential. So it's right at the top, it's right in the education. And of course, you're going to want to spell it out. So instead of writing NDTR, nutrition, dietetic technician registered, just so that they understand what that means. And then you can actually expand upon what that means within the cover letter. So in my experiences as an NDTR, I have worked in such and such positions, and my expertise really shines here. Because once you show, like, I had to pass an exam, I had to do credentialing to get here, I maintain continuing education, that is another helpful point. Maybe you want to list under your education is relevant ongoing education, relevant continuing education credits. And if you've taken some CPEUs that might be relevant to the position, you could list those.
That's a good point. I've never thought of adding the CPUs onto that resume, showing that it's a credential that you have to keep up.
Yes. And also, of course, listing the date that you have, that you acquired your NDTR credential. And one thing that it sounds almost counterintuitive, but I find very helpful is maybe perhaps listing the expiration date with your continuing ed credits so that they understand this isn't like you get it one time and you hold it forever credential. This is, you have to maintain it. I know that's kind of a red flag for me if I go to someone's LinkedIn and they have, say, a health coach degree or a health coach certification, I'll say, from a website, and it says issued 2013, no expiration date. I'm like, that person can go along the rest of their lives calling themselves a health coach when they haven't upkept any kind of credentialing for the last 8 years. And so if you show that this is a credential you have to keep up and that you have continuing education that goes with it, they will recognize you're more invested and that you are more qualified for the position.
Yeah, that is so helpful. Like that these are things that you don't think about or you don't really talk about. Putting out that expiration date, spelling out the credential, talking about the CPUs, because it's a lot of work to keep up the credential. You're paying for it every single year.
Yeah.
So you want to show that you are keeping up with those credentials. So
absolutely.
Going back or staying on the resume, essentially, then highlighting what an NDTR does. So say they have some job experience and they're looking for a new job. How do you highlight in like the bullets and points. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but I just wanted to spend a little bit more specific time on that resume, showing what an NDTR can do in the job descriptions and the volunteer work and those other sections in a resume.
Absolutely. I would recommend including experiences where you were mentored or you mentored someone else. So if you worked alongside an RD, if that's a more recognized credential at the job where you are applying, that will definitely make a connection that gives it some context. Oh, this NDTR worked right alongside that food service company's dietitian. Now I have a better understanding of what this applicant, what their job experience is. Also, in the same vein, if you supervised anyone, again, in a clinical setting or in a food service setting, that's a beneficial piece because it shows your leadership and it shows, again, just your qualification that, hey, I am a trusted, qualified professional to provide guidance and leadership and management for a group of people. So that highlights A, you as a professional in general, and B, you as a nutrition expert.
Wow.
So those would be key points I'd bring out anywhere where you can show you managed someone or you worked alongside someone also in the nutrition field.
Yeah, you just have you are an expert in this because you don't think putting dietitian, because most of the time NDTRs are working alongside a dietitian. You have to in most cases. So just putting that there, that might alert someone to say, oh, this is like a dietitian credential. It's similar. They're working together, which is genius to shine like what you're doing. Oh, yeah. Anna, how do you know all this stuff? So helpful.
I've done a lot of resume iterations. I mean, I'm a young professional. I'm in my first job. But I mean, everywhere from, again, like I said, I started in high school with my very first resume, and then my first resume was so, we should get into resume formatting in a minute. But, and actually one tip that I also have, especially for NDTRs, if you're moving around, if you have multiple positions at once and you're picking and choosing when you're applying for a couple jobs, some relevant or some experience might be more relevant to one position, but not to the other. So I like to keep what I call a master resume. So what I have on my computer is my master resume. It's like 3 pages long and it has all my job experience ever, back to, again, high school, when I worked at a bakery. And then it has my job I had in college when I worked in food service. It has the summers I was a nanny, because that shows leadership and time management, all these things that I now would probably not put on my resume. But if I needed to, I could pull from them. Just because you don't want to forget something you've written about a past position. So again, for example, the nannying example, that doesn't apply to any job I would apply to now, but maybe at the time that I wrote it to apply for a job during college, I wrote, this past summer, I was a nanny for 3 children under the ages of 12. And I followed a weekly budget, was punctual to all of their activities, communicated with the parents, worked with conflict resolution, these things that maybe in positions since then, I haven't had to deal with. I haven't had to deal with conflict resolution between children. But say 10 years from now, I wanted to pivot, do a 180 and work in clinical pediatrics. I could go, okay, well, I haven't worked as a nanny or haven't worked with kids in 10 years, but I remember how good I was at communicating with parents about serious topics. Even though it's something, again, I haven't done in my current job. It's like, oh, I forgot I have that skill, and that's something I can reference. So I'd recommend keeping a master resume, definitely, especially again for the NDTR, if you are applying for, you could, like you said, there's so many different fields of nutrition. So if you're applying for something that's more marketing, social media based, that's gonna have a totally different skill set than if you were, again, applying for something that was maybe community nutrition or public health focused.
Yeah, that's a really good idea to have that master list. And so with that master list, is there like a limit to how late a job should be on there? Like, is it 5 years, or any jobs post that you don't really put on there, but you can reference in an interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with the help of LinkedIn, what I would recommend is keep your resume more short, concise, and relevant. So depending on how long you've been in your current position, of course, absolutely list your most recent position. And I'm still a few years out of college, so I would still maybe put on a position I had in college where I worked with a dietitian, and then would maybe include some volunteer experience that shows, I still work hard even if I'm not getting paid for it, because that just shows also your humility as a person. Not humility, but your character, I should say, that you take time to volunteer. So that's something that could be relevant. But then on your LinkedIn, you could get back into the nitty gritty of, let's pretend 2 years ago, I had a job. Actually, this did happen when I was in college. I had a job over winter break for 1 month at a local deli. That doesn't go on my resume because it doesn't feel relevant. However, it is on my master resume in case, like you said, it comes up in an interview. Do you have experience with food service or food safety? I'd say yes. I was the only ServSafe certified employee when I had a job at a deli. I didn't hold the position long enough to feel that it was, relevant to be on my resume. However, yes, I do have that experience. So I would say, as far as a time limit, I don't know if I'd give it a time limit so much as I would give it a number of positions limit. Just prioritize most recent, perhaps second most recent, depending on how many positions you've had. And if you've had 5 most relevant positions, I wouldn't go back further than 10 years, maybe 5, probably 10. Depends also how far along you are in your professional career. So again, 10 years to me at the age of 24 is very different than someone who is in their 50s, who might go back 20 years on their resume because they held one position for 12 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good answer to that question. It's really like kind of moving with your experience and what you have. And so you mentioned you want to talk about resume formatting, and I'm so curious to hear what you have to say. And I'm going to just drop this one question in, and you can explain everything you need to. But there's this trend to make your resume look pretty now. So I want your thoughts on that as well. But let's hear about resume formatting from this expert, Anna.
Yes. Well, and I can kind of address the question you had right off the bat, because that's the story I was going to tell you is I made my first resume in high school, and I had some friends who wanted to go to college for graphic design or like more artistic things. I was not going to school for that. However, their resumes looked really cool. So my first resume had my name in a circle up in the corner. And then it said, had my full name, and then it had my contact information like this, and then a big bold line. And then it said education, job experience, volunteer experience. And then I had a second page with my references, which we can get to. And I brought it to my teacher for her to, because they would edit and give feedback. And she said, I thought you wanted to go to school for science, or nutrition or business. And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, your resume it looks really nice, but it doesn't fit what you're going for. She goes, you'll stand out, but you might not be, you might not be taken as seriously for this role because it looks like you kind of made it lackadaisical, or you made it too casual. And so that's not to say your resume has to look stiff and blocky. There are definitely ways to spruce it up a bit. So again, if you are an NDTR who, I know you've had Annika Weeks on the podcast, and Ani designed my website. And for someone like that, where you are in the social media, marketing, graphic design world, if you have your name in a circle on your resume, that's awesome, because that's more fitting to your clientele. But if you are going for something that's, again, public health, clinical, food service, they're not looking for pretty, they are looking for get to the point. So the way that I'd recommend formatting is, of course, you'll have your name at the top, your full name, but also whatever you go by, what's your preferred name. So if your name is Elizabeth, but you go by Ellen, we'll say, instead of Elizabeth, put Ellen on your resume, because then it gets this I don't have a name like that, so it's hard for me to say, but I'm like, it'd be so hard to have a name. Like my boyfriend's name is Matthew. I'm like, do you go by Matt or Matthew at work? Because his email signature says Matthew, but everyone calls him Matt. So if you have a name that you would prefer someone call you, I'd say put that on your resume. So again, if your name is Elizabeth, but you go by Liz, it's not too informal to put Liz on your resume. That's okay. Then you'll have your contact information. This is where I would have your LinkedIn URL as well. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, I would certainly recommend it because we referenced it earlier, but LinkedIn is where you not only can connect with other professionals, but you can expand upon your own experiences. So if you don't have room to get to them in your resume, at least they can be found somewhere. So we got contact info that includes your phone number, your email address. Just make sure your email address is something professional. I mean, it doesn't have to be, because if you have a common name, you might not be able to get like first name, last name at gmail.com, but you might throw a period or an underscore or a number at the end, and that's totally fine. Just avoid things that are like foodiegirl@hotmail.com. I mean, you want something that looks polished and professional. One of the best tips I got as you're working on your resume, one of the best tips I got from my high school teacher was to not make your resume too left heavy. So when you think about how you type across a page, everything is left aligned. So it's going to go title of your position, and then the date that you held the position, and then your bullet points of what you did. So one of the best tips she gave was actually to right align the dates you held the position. So over here, I'll give an example. My first job was at Nothing Bundt Cakes, which was a bakery. So I might say Nothing Bundt Cakes, and then however you want to format it. I always did one of those like tall straight lines, or you could do a forward slash or a backslash, and then your title. So I was a guest services representative, and then tab to a right align and say, February 2012 to March 2016, or however many dates that was, because then you have something to balance it, on this side of your resume. So when someone's looking at it, they're not like tilting their head this way because the whole page is shifted to the left. So align some things on that right side of the paper, and your bullet points, especially if they are longer bullet points that go down to the second line, justify them so that they fill up the whole length of the page rather than being really short and all aligned to the left.
So you can still make it pretty. It sounds like you can still have fun with your resume.
Absolutely. And I guess one thing I forgot to mention as well is when you are listing a position, it is helpful to list the general location of where it was. So you have the name of the company, the location, and then your position. And actually, if you held multiple positions while you were at that company, so again, I'll give the example of Nothing Bundt Cakes. I'll say it was Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then for this first bullet point, whatever I held most recently, which was actually a shift lead, I would say shift lead, bullet point, bullet point. It's like I managed people in the store and I performed closing duties, including, handling the finances of the day, because that's something that's relevant perhaps to a position. Then under that, I would say my earlier position I held. So always listing your experiences in descending order of recency. So the newest thing at the top, the oldest thing at the bottom, because that's going to be your most relevant experience, is what's most recent. That's what they care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So many freebies with cover letters and resumes.
Yes.
So I want to know what it looks like if someone wants to work with you one-on-one and get your expertise on the specific application cover letter that they're working on currently.
Yeah, I'm so glad you just brought that up, because my next kind of point I was going to say, and this is what I love the most and what I can help with the most, is the editing, the copy editing, helping you find the right words to use, checking your grammar, because sometimes we all make typos and can read them and miss them. So it's another set of eyes. And again, just helping you format things in a way, helping with grammar and punctuation. So if that's something that you need for your resume, your cover letter, or both, please get in touch with me. You can find me on Instagram at Good Vibes Better Food. and feel free to send me a DM there and we can start in the DMs and move over to email. You can also email me, Anna@goodvibesbetterfood.com. Or if you go to my website, goodvibesbetterfood.com, I do have a contact form at the bottom of the page. So you can always find me there, send me a message. Just give me some background about the position that you are wanting to apply to and what your time frame looks like. Is it, I need a quick turnaround, this job was just posted and I want to apply by the end of the week? Or I generally want to develop a resume that's versatile so that I have it in my back pocket when a position becomes available, giving me an idea of how quickly you'll need a turnaround and what's the context, the position you're coming from and where you're headed, so that I can have that framework when I look at your resume and your cover letter. And we can start from ground zero, which will be a little bit more intensive, talking about if you've never built a resume, you've never written a cover letter, how can we kind of make a rough template and build on it and fit in your experiences? Or if you have one already that you feel is pretty polished, how can we tailor it to where you are applying? So kind of a range of, do you need to start at a level 1 or are you already at a level 8 and you want me to take you to a 10? We can do any of that. So just get in contact with me personally and I'm happy to help. Again, this is, like you said, Marie, it's my second passion.
Yes, I can tell just by the way you're talking about it and like the things that you're thinking about. It's something that you would know if you are passionate about it. Normally people are not like thinking, how can I enhance my resume? So I really appreciate everything that you've said. And so just to reiterate, Anna, how do people find you online to get in contact with you?
The best way to get in contact with me is via Instagram at Good Vibes Better Food. Again, you can slide into my DMs. And I also would just like to point out, even if you're not looking for this kind of resume cover letter help at this time, one thing I do take pride in is my text posts, which are usually focused on nutrition science, and food safety. So if you need to brush up on those things, or you just want some tidbits to share with your clients or your patients, I do put out some really educational content, and it's all, of course, referenced from reputable sources, the FDA, the USDA. So if you're looking for somewhere to get credible food science information, you can find me at Good Vibes Better Food. And again, find me through my website or my email as well.
Perfect. You can scroll through Instagram and get educated. That's the best when you're like relaxing and still learning.
Yes. And if you're interested also in intuitive eating, health at every size, body acceptance, that is my paradigm of work that I work in. So I'm a weight neutral practitioner. I do a lot of reposting of other folks in the space. So if that's something you're interested in learning about more, or you're already in that framework, then follow me for more of that kind of content.
I really hope that everyone listening took some really good advice from it, and you can already make huge changes just from listening to this podcast. And if you want to enhance that resume, those cover letters even more, Good Vibes Better Food, there's 3 different ways to reach out to her. Very easy. Slide into those DMs and start making changes in your career. Because you can complain about no one knowing what the NDTR credential is, or you can take a step and start working on your resume and those cover letters, and like do what Anna said, talk about dietitians on the cover letter or resume, and talk about the CPUs and the expiration days. There's expiration date for a credential. There's so many ways to make the wheel keep going and not to give up. So thank you so much for watching. Again, Good Vibes Better Food. Go follow her, even if you don't want to work with her right away. You want to have her in your back pocket. And we'll see you in our next spotlight. Thank you so much for watching or listening.